I'm David May. Welcome to this edition of CID Property Management's online training session. Today we're going to be talking about the role of the association treasurer. But before we get going, I'd like to just say that this is just not a comprehensive, in-depth course on being a treasurer. This is just an overview of what's expected of you as a treasurer. There are a lot of resources that we can help you with in getting you going to more fully develop your role as a treasurer, but just this is a good overview, help you get going. We're going to be talking about the basic responsibilities of you as the association treasurer. So with that in mind, let's take a look. The first area of responsibility that you're going to have is overseeing the operating and the reserve accounts for your association. What are they? What do they both mean? The operating account is the account that is used to do your daily transactions, pay the bills, the vendors, that sort of thing that come in each month. You'll be using that as your operating account, not unlike your regular checking account for personal purposes. Obviously, you don't use the association's account for your personal purposes, but just for as a comparative analysis or comparison. So that's what that's for. Then you have the reserve accounts. The reserve accounts will be the accounts where the reserve expenses are paid from. They are going to be typically your liquid reserve account. That's where you'll be paying the regular bills coming out of the reserve account. But also, you'll have some accounts that may be money market reserve accounts, might be CDs, those sorts of things where you have the extra money invested, the longer term money that you want to have put aside and get some extra interest earning on that. So those are the two primary accounts that you're going to be responsible for, the operating and reserve accounts. Next area of responsibility has to do with maintaining the association's financial documents. The documents that you'll be getting will be included typically in the board packet that we'll be sending out to you along with all of the other board members. You can see that there are quite a few pages in this document, but they are going to, we'll go through some of those documents that you'll typically get in there, the financially related documents, that is. So let's take a look at some of those. They're going to include the balance sheet, income expense statement, the general ledger, checkbooks, bank statements, accounts receivable, accounts payable, any other items that may be appropriate for receiving and taking a look at will be typically included in that board packet. These are the documents. Let's take a look individually and see what those individually look like. I'll give you a brief overview of each one of those. The balance sheet is going to show a quick analysis of what you've got in the way of reserve accounts, regular checking accounts, what your current liabilities, reserve payment or reserve amounts set aside are, your equity. The total liabilities and equity should always balance out, and that's why they call it a balance sheet, to the total assets of the association, which would be the reserve accounts and the regular checking accounts that you have up top. So those should always equal out to each other. It's pretty straightforward, pretty basic thing. The next item that you'll be looking at would be the income and expense statement. On that, you're going to have, for example, on this sample here, you see your assessment income. It shows how much came in, how much you expected to have come in on budget-wise, and so you can do comparative analysis based on that. You'll also have all of your different expenses that show up in general terms, like your landscaping, your general maintenance and repair, trash removal, those sorts of things will all show up on this income and expense statement. The next one you see is your general ledger or your journal entry. These show all of the different transactions that went on within your particular accounts. And so you can look at this and see what all happened with all of your accounts, where all that money went each month, during the month, and you'll always have a balancing out situation where you have one debit and one credit, or you might have one credit, for example, and you might have multiple debits, but collectively one side will balance out on the other side. So they should always equal collectively the total amount for each side. So for example, you can see on reserve transfer there at the bottom of the cash checking operating account, the $425 reserve transfer went over to the cash savings reserve, the larger group below that, and it shows that $425 debit amount on that side. So you had a debit and a credit, they both equal out. And that's what you'd be looking for. They're kind of confusing sometimes if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, but they just know that there should always be each transaction that occurred on that account and the corresponding debit and credit balance should be equal, and at the end of the general ledger you will have a total equaling what all the transactions included during the month. Questions on that, please give us a call. I know it can be very confusing. The easiest ones are the income, expense, and the balance sheet to understand. They're pretty straightforward. The next thing you have would be the checkbooks. The individual checkbook for your association, different association accounts would be here, whether it's an operating or reserve checkbook. And it'll show all of the deposits, all of the checks that were written, and it gives you the balances from each of those, just like you would expect to see any other checkbook. And then when we get the bank statements in at the end of the month, you'll see that we go through that and we look at each of them, take a balance, or rather we just check off the individual things that came in and make sure that everything balances out, and that all of the reconciliation, you'll get the reconciliation report along with the bank statement. You'll also get an accounts receivable list here. For example, you can see here, you can look at individuals by lot number or by their name, and to see where they're at, how much they owe, how delinquent they are, where they're at in the collection process. So you get a lot of good information in terms of the collections off of this. You may also get an accounts payable, although typically not, because we don't operate under the accrual system, but there could be something in terms of accounts payable for the prepaid accounts, and that's about the only thing you would typically see. I'll talk a little bit more about the accrual and cash accounting and modified accrual systems later. So those are the primary areas that you're going to be, or primary reports that you'll be getting in, that you'll need to know that are going to be coming in. And if you have any, again, if you have any questions about any of those individually, please give us a call. We'll get you on the road to understanding on those, hopefully. All right. You'll need to oversee the deposits also. That's another area of responsibility. Your monthly financial reports that you'll get, you can go online and take a look and see what's going on there. So you'll just have to make sure that you do get a good overview and oversee these different types of reports. If you do need to have a deposit report, for example, like what you see here, we can get you something that shows the individual deposits for each homeowner, how much they deposited, and that sort of thing. Although we typically don't do that because it's just not a report that's really needed. Again, we can always generate these reports. We can send them to you electronically, save a tree, and all that good stuff. So, all right. Another area that you're going to have a responsibility on is to oversee the investments of the association. Because you are going to be saving money for future reserve transactions, that means you're going to have some money that you'll need to oversee if there are some investments that you are doing. Typically, the investments are going to include the different reserve accounts. You should follow sound investment strategy. You might need to work with an investment counselor if there's enough money being generated and in your reserve accounts. You should also consider, of course, the safety and liquidity of the different investments that you do. You don't want to have any high-risk investments for the association. That's bad fiscal responsibility. You're supposed to take it safe in regards to the association money. There's no effort on your part that needs to be done other than just to make sure that it's safe and that there's good liquidity as needed. And for example, you want to help that with that liquidity, you might want to ladder your CDs. In other words, set them up so that they all come due not at all one time, but in sequence, so that you'll have access to that money as needed. You can get from your investment banker, for example, Morgan Stanley. Here you'll see a report that shows that this individual association had 3 different accounts and some custodial holdings, and they had a collective amount of X number of dollars. All right, you'll get that money or you get that report. You'll want to review it and make sure it's all accurate and up to date. You'll also want to ensure that all of the association's bills are paid. That's pretty basic too. I've heard reports from other HOAs where they've talked about their management company and they go, they're not paying our bills on time. Well, unless you've got some serious issues going on, there's no reason not to get those bills paid on time. And that's part of your job, to make sure that the bills are in fact paid on time. You want to review the invoices, make sure that they're accurate, and that what you're being billed is what you're actually paying. So for example, here you'll see an invoice. You'll take a look at the invoice, make sure that it's been paid and the amount paid corresponds to what is on the checking account, and that everything is on the up and up. Another big area of responsibility is the overseeing of the preparation of the budget. Budget's one of the big key items for each association, because that's what drives the spending. It's what drives how much the dues are for each association. So let's take a quick look at the budget itself. Here you have the revenue on the top. It shows the amount of revenue per association resident here, and that's really the only item that you want to actually budget for. You'll have expenses, you'll have like electricity and water and insurance and all those sorts of things. You'll need to have those all budgeted for. So how do you get to that point? Well, you have to prepare the budget, and you get with the association's budget committee. And you'll get together and you'll talk about it. You'll review the previous budget. You'll look at that. You'll talk to us as management to help you answer any questions in arriving at a good solid budget for your upcoming fiscal year. Typically you'll do that starting several months ahead of time. So if your fiscal year ends with the calendar year, you'll want to start probably in August, September, getting the budget committee getting together, talking about your budget, that sort of thing. You'll want to also factor in some estimated bad debt, because that's important, especially in today's climate where you do have some bad debt that is generated each month. It's unfortunate, but due to foreclosures or one reason or another, you wind up with some bad debt. You do need to budget for that as well. You'll also need to determine the estimated expenses for the upcoming fiscal year, and you'll take a look at that and determine, all right, we're going to have X number of dollars increase, we're going to have new expenses, this expense has gone away, but we've got new ones here. So you just need to look at each different line item and then determine how that is going up, down, going away, whatever it may be. And then you'll also need to determine the amount that each member must contribute to help pay for all of that. So to that end, you're going to need to inform the board if there's going to be insufficient income to fund the budget. You have to make sure that there is in fact sufficient income. If there's not, what are you going to do? You have two options. You have one, you can either raise the dues to meet the budget, or you can decrease the budget amount so that your dues will stay the same, but you'll move away from doing something that would be on the budget ordinarily. In other words, you've kind of line item vetoed a certain budget item. Generally speaking, that's difficult because most associations run fairly lean as it is. So if the association's expenses are going up, you have to accommodate those expenses and raise the dues. It's unfortunate, but you do need to inform the board, let them know what's going on so that the board can send out notice to the association's members in a timely manner. And there are certain requirements that need to be met by that.
in terms of prior to the fiscal year starting, you need to make sure that you meet certain time constraints on letting your neighbors, your association members know about that. All right, another item that you'll be responsible for is ensuring that a reserve study is prepared. And the reserve study, first of all, there's a reserve study is required once every 3 years, and then updates are to be done in the intervening years. And the reserve study is usually completed by a reserve specialist. They go into the community, they take a look at what's going on around there, they will look at all the different amenities that you have and determine the estimated value, estimated useful life, and estimated remaining life. So that will all be part of the report that you'll be getting when you receive that reserve study. And then they establish the amount of money that needs to be set aside to meet these reserve items. And so you should also include money in there for any special projects that might be coming up, and also any operating reserve money that you need to have increased as well. So let's take a quick look at some of those different items that you'll see in terms of the reserve study. You'll see on the reserve disclosure here, you'll have a variety of different things, the profile of the community, the parameters that they're using to determine the amounts that they're estimating, the summary, how much you've got percent funded, and what they estimate as a reserve allocation that you'll need to be making. And then you'll see a report here that shows the amount of money that they estimate each reserve item is worth, and the useful life, and the remaining life of that individual item. So you can kind of take a look at that. Take a good look, take some time, look at your own individual reserve report that you'll have for your association, and you'll see that each of these items are in there in one form or another. Each reserve company has their own little different format, but they all basically say the same thing. Whether it's for the cash flow analysis, showing how much you're going to be estimated funding on that, how you are in your overall funding and looking out over the next number of years. So all of those things are going to be in your reserve report. Just become familiar with it, know that it's there, and know how to use it. Again, questions, give us a call. We'll help get you up to speed on that. All right. Next item, ensure that a report of financial transactions are made to the board. How are you going to do that? Well, you'll get these board packets, as I mentioned. You get these things in the mail and electronically and so forth. So that's how you make sure, by making sure that we are preparing the reports that the board wants, and then the board now has that information at their fingertips as well. We send all that out routinely to the board each month, as you probably have already seen by now. And in that, of course, you have the balance sheets, the income expense statement, general ledger and such. All of those items that we talked about, reviewed, are in there. Next area of responsibility is to serve as the board's liaison with the association's auditor. The auditor is going to be doing an audit or a review of your association's money. Depending on the governing documents, one of those things will probably have to be done. There are 3 different types of ways that the auditors or CPAs will take a look at that, and one of those is audit. That's a very detailed. The review is less detailed, less expensive too, because less of the time is required by the CPA, and also a compilation, which is just a general, almost not really used much at all. Some associations may be exempt, but even though they might have only a limited amount of income coming in, they should still get that periodically, at the very least, reviewed by a CPA, so that you know, as the board treasurer, that everything's all as it should be within the finances of the association. Now, also going along with that, though, you have to make sure that the taxes get prepared and that they're filed on time. The association CPA will typically complete both the tax return and the audit. Taxes must be done usually within 75 days. So if your fiscal year ends at the end of your calendar year, by March 15th, you'll typically have to have your taxes done, or else an extension needs to be filed until the association's taxes are completed. So your auditor and your tax accountant are going to be one and the same typically. Next area of responsibility is to review and implement safeguards to protect the association's financial assets. Now, most of these things are just, when we go through these, they're pretty obvious. They're just kind of using common sense, like being involved in the financial operations of the association, understanding and reviewing these financial statements. Reserve accounts need to be under the board control. That's, by the way, California law. Keep the bank account signature cards up to date so that some old board member doesn't have access to sign off on some of these accounts. You want to minimize the petty cash withdrawals and access to petty cash. You just want to take a look at anything that just looks funny, it throws up a red flag. If there is something, take a look at it, question it, wonder about it, because if you're not sure in your mind, then ask the question. It needs to be asked. That's your responsibility. You'll also want to review the homeowner's delinquency balances, make sure that multiple bids for contracts are received, that you have adequate fidelity insurance in place, and that you hire CPAs that are knowledgeable about association financing, as opposed to the associations. If a CPA doesn't necessarily know about association finances, it's like a doctor. You want to go to a specialist for your medical needs if there's a problem there. Just the same way you want to go to a specialist for homeowner associations as a CPA. So same sort of thing. Now, delegation of duties. The treasurer, you can delegate many of your duties to the management company, and that's normal. That's standard fare. So that's okay, but you still need to oversee the work and review the work that you have access to, like in the board packets. Make sure that you review that and do get your questions answered. There are different types of accounting you have. I mentioned the cash basis accounting. Let's take a brief look at that. It's similar to your checkbook, limited accounting information. It's a shortened and limited use balance sheet, and there's an inability to highlight a weakened financial position. To the contrary of that, you have your accrual accounting, which is a recognition of accounting transactions when they actually take place. There's more detailed and in-depth accounting information that you'll get. You get a more detailed balance sheet, and you have the ability to highlight a weakened financial position. However, as I mentioned, most associations use just the modified accrual system. That's kind of using a little bit of both. You have a reasonable financial information that is generated and available to you and the treasurer and to the board. And it does not require the major cost and time commitment associated with full accrual system, because that can be very time consuming. It's a very heavy, intense, doing the accrual system is very intense. And for associations, due to the type of finances that the association has, you really don't need to have the full accrual. It's just not that type of association, type of corporation that you need to have that. So that's that. Financial records retention, let's talk about that a little bit. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of records generated off of this. Over a period of time, you're going to have a lot of boxes that will be generated. So how long do you keep these things? Well, you don't need to keep them 20, 30, 40 years, however old your association is necessarily. Some things you do need to keep, like your minutes and so forth, but we're going to just talk about financial records. And up on the screen you can see the different types of records that you'll need to keep for 7 years, like your general ledgers, your tax returns and worksheets, canceled checks, those sorts of things that you see here. Those are items that you're going to need to have keeping records of for 7 years. Now here you see for 4 years, you'll have your financial records like bank statements, the deposit slips and so forth. Those you need to keep for 4 years. But for sure, for 3 years, you need to keep all of the records for the current fiscal year and your 2 prior years for inspection by the membership as per the California Civil Code. So that's pretty much it in terms of what's required of you as the association treasurer. There's a lot of information here, I understand that. And we're here to help you to get your questions answered, to help you understand your role as a treasurer.
You've done your first part by taking a look at this video, and we thank you for taking the time to do that. If you do have additional questions, feel free, as always, to contact our office, and we'll help you out and navigate those waters of the Association Treasurer. And we appreciate your time. Thanks for looking in on this, and we'll talk to you again soon.